Today we're taking a look at some potential trade targets this summer for the Ottawa Senators. A couple of names have been mentioned by Ottawa media that we're going to discuss. Plus, is Evgeni Malkin done in Pittsburgh? It seems as though it's much more likely Letang will return. We'll discuss the possible scenario there. Plus, we have some updates out of Detroit and Vancouver as well. Plus, we have lots of signings and some more coaching updates. All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to talk about here today. Of course, today is the beginning of the Stanley Cup Final. Game 1 goes tonight in Denver. The Colorado Avalanche and Tampa Bay Lightning is set to do battle to begin the final series to determine the 2022 Stanley Cup champion. Gary Bettman, the NHL commissioner, is expected to speak before Game 1, so we may have some more news or newsworthy items come out of that press conference that we'll either discuss in a later video tonight or tomorrow. But we'll be interested to see what he has on his agenda a little bit later. We do know tonight Braden Point is in for the Lightning, which is great news for them. No word yet on Cogliano or Kadri for the Avalanche. It does look like Darcy Kuemper is back and will be the Game 1 starter for the Avs here as well. So it'll be very interesting to see how this series goes. Is it going to be the rest versus rust factor? And if so, how is it going to carry on? Obviously, we've seen that with the Lightning, and they were impacted on the opposite side where they were the rested team before, but once they get going, they were unstoppable. Will the Avalanche be in a similar predicament, or will they come out flying here? Will the Lightning have a hard time adjusting to the altitude in Denver? That's also a potential factor as well. So we'll all be very interested to see how things get started later this evening. As I mentioned, as we have several signings to look at here today. A few prospects and some NHL players are getting re-signed. The Columbus Blue Jackets have re-signed goaltender Daniil Tarasov to a 3-year contract valued at just over $1 million per year, $1.05 million. Of course, the Jackets also have Elvis Merzlikins signed to a more lucrative contract to be the starter, and they also did re-sign Korpisalo as well. So this will be interesting to see how this all plays out. Of course, Korpisalo is coming off hip surgery. I believe Tarasov had a surgery as well this offseason, so it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out. Fair to say they definitely see Tarasov with the 3-year deal as the longer-term backup option to Merzlikins. At least that's the way things look here today. The Ottawa Senators have announced that they've signed forward Dylan Gambrell to a 1-year contract extension valued at $950,000. Gambrell is coming off an expiring contract. That was a 2-year deal paying him $700,000 that he originally signed with the San Jose Sharks before he was acquired by the Ottawa Senators. To some degree, some Sens fans are a little surprised by this. I think a lot of people thought that Mark Kastelic might go into next year being the odds-on favorite for the 4th-line center spot, and I still think that's a possibility. Gambrell can mostly play center, but can be a winger or like a 13th forward if need be. I think he had his moments where he was impressive, but it wasn't like super impressive, so difficult to say where he fits in the lineup. Either way, it's a 1-year deal under $1 million. It's not really much risk here. That way, if they feel Kastelic's not ready for that spot full time, then it certainly kind of takes the pressure off. And if Gambrell goes through waivers later in the year or something like that, if he's being outplayed, not really a big deal. You have to think that Sens prospect Ridley Gregg will be in the running as well for a bottom 6 role with the team in training camp this year. Be interesting to see where he fits and how this signing might impact that decision as well. We have an interesting signing in Detroit. They've signed themselves a 31-year-old goaltender out of Finland who was just recently the MVP at the World Championship Tournament, and that's UC Olkanora. So we'll see where he fits in. So obviously at 31 years of age, he gets a 1-year contract. So be interesting to see if he ends up being a good fit there in Detroit, being on the NHL roster, or if he'll end up going to the minors. I don't know. I mean, obviously he's a very mature veteran guy. At age 31 to come over to the NHL is not something you commonly see. So be very, very interesting to see where things go. I know he had a heck of a tournament at the World Championships. Be interesting to see how he could do with some NHL opportunities. We also had a re-signing in Dallas. They've re-signed Fredrik Karlstrom, who's a 24-year-old center who gets a 1-year, 2-way contract as well. Pays him $750,000 at the NHL level. And the Montreal Canadiens have signed defenseman Otto Leskinen, who's an undrafted Finnish defenseman who 25 years old now on a 1-year deal, 2-way contract. You might find that name familiar because he has played in the NHL before, although briefly, and it was with the Montreal Canadiens. He played a handful of games between the 1920 and the 2021 season. Last year, he split between time in the KHL and Liga, but obviously before that, was in North America. So the Habs, going through a rebuild now, decided to give him another opportunity, another chance to see how things go. Another great example of a low risk, potentially high reward contract if it works out. So we'll see where that goes when we get to training camp. Of course, as well, we have some coaching news. Of course, you've probably seen the video on the channel earlier. If you didn't, I'll link it in the YouTube cards up here. You can watch it. The Philadelphia Flyers are set to hire John Tortorella as their next head coach. It's just a matter of sorting out the contract details. Apparently, he is formally meeting with the Flyers tomorrow to hopefully get that finalized, and I would suspect an announcement likely comes then. Of course, we saw Bruce Cassidy go to Vegas just the day before, so we've finally seen some dominoes fall here. Elliotte Friedman's also reporting that with Cassidy gone to Vegas, that probably paves the way to confirm things for Peter DeBoer to be the next head coach of the Dallas Stars. He was previously mentioned as being a contender there, even an odds-on favorite, but once Cassidy was available, I think the Stars definitely wanted to speak to him and kind of take their time, and obviously he's now in Vegas, so that probably opens the door for DeBoer, but we will see where they go. Obviously, we have Barry Trotz still very much on the market. As these other teams make decisions, I think things are looking better for Winnipeg, but there's no guarantee because there is other options out there. There is some speculation about even a return to Nashville to work in their management team. So I guess we'll have to wait and see. But Trotz reportedly has been starting to get back to teams to at least tell them they're not in the running anymore. So hopefully it's not too much longer before we find out what his intentions are and where he's going to work next year. But according to Elliotte Friedman, all indications are that he is going to coach somewheres, and we'll see where that ends up being in the not too distant future. Now, as I mentioned, we have a variety of some trade and some free agent rumors to look at. One, I want to talk about the Pittsburgh Penguins. I know I was listening to NHL Network Radio and Sirius XM earlier, listening to an interview with Bill Meltzer on the Point Show with Boomer Gordon, and they were talking obviously about the Penguins and their upcoming free agency with their big names like Malkin and Letang, and how this roster could be, changed, or what moves they may make over the offseason here. And Meltzer's comments kind of pinpointed that he feels that it's pretty much a given that Malkin likely doesn't return, that the signing of Letang is much more likely and much more important to them, given the fact that Letang plays such a big role in the back end. Malkin, of course, has been injured a lot. Not that they don't want to keep Malkin. I think there's very much lots of interest there, and he certainly made it sound like there was. But it's kind of a case for Malkin to fit with the Penguins, that he may need to make less money to the point that he may not want to. I know he's made comments before that it wasn't all about money, and that he, was content wanting to be a Penguin, and that's fine. But many believe that he's, coming off making $9.5 million. He may not mind making less, but I don't think he's going to want to make less to the point that he would accept like a $5 million contract. Meltzer made mention that wouldn't be surprised if a team in free agency offered him at least 7.5, and that might be enough to really mess with the Pens cap situation, that they just really can't go there as much as they'd like to keep him. It may not work out. Now, not to say for sure that it won't, but there were reports before that starting points and contracts for Malkin and Letang were in a 3-year term range around that $5 million mark. I don't know where things stand with Letang, but they're definitely going to have to come up a lot higher. Certainly he's looking for a little more term than 3 years, and more money than he's making now, which is what I had read, which he is making $7.25 million now, and coming off a career season at his age, I think he can continue to produce at a high level, but certainly going to be skeptical just how long can he keep that up. I mean, he does have a history of tons of injuries, and although he's done a good job of keeping himself much healthier in recent years, you just can't help but wonder when the body could start breaking down again, or when the production value is going to drop a bit. You do have to be very careful with that contract, but ultimately that's where things stand on those negotiations, according to Meltzer. Much more likely for Letang to return than Malkin. No speculation on where Malkin could end up, but it sounds like they're working on Letang's contract, see where that falls. And of course, they already got Brian Rust done. And once they have the Letang contract sorted out and hopefully get him signed, then at that point they can turn to Malkin with what they kind of have left to work with here cap-wise, and kind of see if they can make it work or not. But odds are it's going to be really tough to do and almost impossible. Now, of course, during the interview, Meltzer was also asked from Boomer Gordon about potential moves they might make. He himself was just, without having any sources, just made a fun prediction that he's seen the Penguins and the Canucks maybe making a blockbuster trade due to the Jim Rutherford connection. We know Rutherford likes his guys, and there's been talk before that he's had his eye on a few Penguin players, and he asked them point blank, if Rutherford were to trade for anybody on the Penguins roster, who do you think it would be? And his answer point blank was John Marino, especially if Chris Letang ends up getting signed. That will put pressure on the cap. It might diminish the role Marino could get, and it might make him a little bit more expendable. So certainly that name has come up before when it comes to the Canucks. Wouldn't be a shocker if they go down that road. It's even been brought up as recently as the last couple of weeks too. It'll be very interesting to see if those two teams do indeed end up connecting on a deal. Now, on another note, there's a speculation on Frank Seravalli's trade bait board that came out just a couple days ago that we've talked about on the channel in other videos about young player Filip Zadina, the former number 6 overall pick in the 2018 NHL draft. Now he's 22 years old, needs a new contract after completing the ELC. He's played 75 NHL games during those 3 years and put up 24 points, which is not overly impressive. He does have a really good shot. He's a gifted shooter, but many label him as being way too much of a perimeter player. And of course, we haven't seen very many players being able to be highly successful shooting from further out and more in the perimeter. You've seen Ovechkin and Stamkos and guys like that kind of make a living of it, but they also don't just have that as their main area. Like, they're not afraid to take that to the net and do the dirtier goals too. So obviously Zadina does have some improving to do if he's going to carve himself out a more successful longer-term NHL career. But there is speculation on Seravalli's front that Yzerman very well could look to swap the young forward, maybe for another forward that might need a change of scenery as well. Obviously things haven't worked so far, but he did caution that maybe Steve Yzerman might decide to have a little bit more patience here, given the fact that they now are going to have a new head coach going into next year. Obviously, Zadina's entire time in Detroit's been under former head coach Jeff Blashill, and maybe a new head coach will bring in a new philosophy, new way of playing, can work with the player to maybe get him going. So maybe they hold off, maybe sign him to a 1-year contract, see how that goes, and see if the new coach, whoever that ends up being, decides to or finds a way to help the player be more successful. With a high pick like that and somebody who clearly has talent, I do think they need to proceed with caution, because you don't want to see him become highly successful in another organization. Now, as I mentioned as well, we have a couple of trade targets to look at for the Ottawa Senators. According to Ottawa Sun Media, Bruce Garriock, he's got a recent article out looking at a couple of names that he feels are possibly in play for the Ottawa Senators when it comes to offseason moves, possibly even involving their number 7 overall 2022 first-round draft pick, which has been made known by Pierre Dorion publicly that he is open to moving that pick if the right deal comes along, if he can get an impact player to insert into the Sens lineup, preferably a top 6 forward, if not a top 4 defenseman. But I think they're really more looking at the forward group when it comes to this pick, given what's potentially on the market. Of course, he names Kevin Fiala as one name to watch, and another one that I found more surprising was what Vegas Golden Knights center iceman William Karlsson. Now, Fiala's been mentioned before from different sources. Plus, we've seen the fact that the Wild and the Senators spent a lot of time in the second half of last season scouting each other in both the NHL and AHL level. So it makes sense that Guerin and the Wild were gearing up to kind of maybe see what they'd like from the Senators in return for a potential Fiala swap. We know the Wild are pressed up hard against cap because of the buyouts for Parise and Suter really kicking in a high gear this year. And many feel there's a very high probability that Kevin Fiala does find himself traded and into a different team before next season. So obviously he's RFA, needs a new deal as well, and probably he's going to want a long-term contract after getting a 1-year deal last year. So obviously that's something that would have to be worked out with any acquiring team. And Fiala does make a lot of sense for Ottawa, given the fact that he's in that right age bracket. He can play top 6. He could possibly be a great winger for Timmy Stützle as the number 2 center, and could be a great fit there with that young core group of players. A guy like William Karlsson, though, who's got 5 years left at $5.9 million, To me, I don't know, that doesn't make any sense at all. Certainly William Karlsson was a bit of an under the radar expansion draft selection by the Vegas Golden Knights, who they got from Columbus. Went in there and became a 43 goal scorer in his first season. Blew all expectations out of the water like many of the Vegas players did, calling themselves the Golden Misfits. They really exceeded expectation, and he earned himself the nickname Wild Bill. So obviously Wild Bill is not so wild anymore. I kind of call him jokingly Mild Bill now. He went from 43 goals and 78 points his first year in Vegas to 12 goals and 35 points last year. No better than a third-line player. Yes, he's pretty good two-way forward, decent defensively. If he was making, a couple $1 million a year less, maybe he was making 3.9 instead of 5.9 and had maybe 3 or 4 years left, I could see how maybe they might want him for a third-line player, but a little bit further along in the rebuild. On so many levels, that kind of a trade does not make any sense. And to be honest, if the Ottawa Senators traded their number 7 overall pick for William Karlsson, I think that would be absolutely crazy. Now, could they do it for Fiala? That makes a lot more sense. Like I said, at least he's young enough. He fits the right age bracket. He's much more offensively gifted, can play top 6, and they could sign him long term. He might be expensive. You're probably looking at a similar type of money that they're going to end up paying to guys like Tkachuk and Norris. But, he's probably worth it if he's going to continue to be an 80-point player throughout the next number of years here in the NHL, since he's kind of peaked here recently. Of course, at a great time when he needs a contract. So we'll see where this goes, but obviously the Sens and the pro scouting area has been an area that has not been great for them in the last couple of years. I would hope that a guy like William Karlsson's name is not something that they really pursue. It doesn't make sense for where they're at and what he's making for a contract. It would help Vegas out of a jam, and unless they're taking that in order to get another big piece out of Vegas that they really like, but I really don't know what that would be that would make any sense. So to me, that doesn't make sense. Fiala does. We'll see where this goes, but I'm sure there'll be lots more reporting on the Sens. So that is all your news for now. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.